Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox and I'd like to welcome you to episode 108 of the FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report. Today I wanted to take a look at supply chain under the FCPA. And what I do here is a little bit different. I talk about some of the various methods that you can use to categorize and risk rank your supply chains. So lots of information here, and this led to a little bit longer podcast than usual, so it comes in at about 37 minutes. If you have any questions or want any follow-up from me, please give me a shout. tfox@tfoxlaw.com. Supply chain and FCPA. And risk-based compliance. What I want to do in this presentation is provide to you some of the general guidelines that various organizations have put out regarding how to risk-base your compliance in the supply chain. There are several different guidelines, and one of the things I'm going to try and emphasize throughout this presentation is that there is no one right way. There are many different right ways to do this. And one of the things that I hope you can take away from this presentation is that the Department of Justice and the Securities and Exchange Commission have made clear in their enforcement actions, in their opinion releases, and in the FCPA guidance, which they jointly released in November of 2012, that a thoughtful approach, well thought out, well laid out, and well documented is what they want you to have in all forms of your compliance protocols, policies, procedures, and regimes. And that includes in the supply chain. So what I intend to do in this presentation is go through several different approaches, and I would ask you to consider which approach might be the best for your organization. So with that, first I'm going to talk about, a little bit too far, sorry about that, the ALM or anti-money laundering approach. The ALM approach, and I have to credit Scott Moritz for laying this out in a blog post a couple of years ago. He laid out 5 different approaches that you should take in an anti-money laundering risk-based process. And I find these also applicable to your supply chain. So I'm going to start with this one. One, geography. And this, of course, is, are you in a geographic location which is prone to or has a high incidence or even a perception of bribery? 2, nexus to government officials. Do you have a lot of government touch points? Does a company who does business with or for you, are they close to government officials? And I don't mean physically close, but is the type of service or product they're providing something that's going to have a nexus or a touch point with a government official? That ties a little bit into the next, which is the business type. If you are dealing with a business that's going to have a lot of government touch points, it's going to have a higher risk, obviously. Then in this one is a little particular or specific to money laundering, the next one, method of payment. But it's something that not a lot of FCPA compliance specialists think about enough, I believe, which is the method of payment. Obviously, cash is not a preferred method of payment because of the difficulty to document the amount that is paid together with its ease of use, as opposed to a check or a wire transfer or something that would create an auditable trail. But for method of payment, I would also ask you to consider what I call offshore payments. And those are payments made to a third party in your supply chain, which is in a location different than one of two. One, the home domicile of the third party, where they headquartered, domicile for legal purposes or tax purposes. And 2, where the services are delivered. If it is something that other than one of those 2 jurisdictions, I think this raises a red flag, and you need to consider the reason. The reason being, the largest reason being tax fraud from the home country or home domicile country of the third party. But also if it's being paid to one of the usual locations that's believed to be a money laundering haven, and you name the place, this may raise a red flag as well. And then finally, the dollar volume of business. Once again, this is an area that compliance, particularly anti-corruption compliance practitioners, do not always think through as an important part of an approach for the supply chain, but it's something that you should consider. And I would suggest to you the following. If you have a vendor that's come to you in the supply chain and you have a huge dollar volume of business with them, that probably means they are business critical to you. So if you manufacture a product that requires steel or some other metal, and you have a vendor that would not appear to be a high risk for anti-corruption, yet if they are your largest vendors, that might be so business critical to you that you would want to take a little bit closer look at them from an anti-corruption perspective. So one of the other themes throughout this will be dollar volume of business. And this is particularly true in the supply chain. Next up is the FSA, or the Financial Services Authority. This is a UK organization that oversees banks and insurance companies in the United Kingdom. And back in 2008, they settled a action against the insurer Aon, where they specifically talked about an internationally accepted corruption perception index. Now, most of us recognize the TICPI, or the Transparency International Corruption Perception Index, but this is one of the first government authorities that talked about the TICPI, so I have cited to this. If you are in a company that has a UK jurisdiction, even if you're not in the financial or banking sector, I think this is something that you can rely upon and you should incorporate into your overall assessment base, your risk assessment base. Obviously, in the prior slide with the AML, we talked about geography, but with this FSA approach, we have a specific UK government regulator approving the use of the TICPI. Now, we've had others since then, but since this was the first one, I wanted to go ahead and set this up for your consideration as well. And if you need to get more information, you can Google the Aon settlement and it will come up, or Scott Moritz, because once again, I got this information from a blog post from Scott. So, what are some of the general concepts that you need to have in your approach? Well, I started off by talking about there is no one program, or there is no one protocol, and that is in large part because there is no one-size-fits-all model or framework. So you need to take a look at some of the things, the concepts that I'm going to talk about, and try to fit them into your organization. You need to build your third-party representative management framework around your mission, leverage your culture, your people, your traditions, and your history. And what I mean here is you need to utilize the talent and people in your organization. The obvious one, or perhaps the most obvious one, would be the business unit representatives who deal with these people. To have a business unit sponsor for a high-risk supplier is absolutely critical. First of all, you need to, and I'll go into some detail about this, but you need to have a good business reason for using a high-risk supplier. But also you need to have someone who can interact and spread the message of compliance more directly to your third-party supplier who's going to interact with them on a regular basis. Employ fair and transparent and appropriate systems. Get the right people involved and implement logical structures. And then have clearly defined roles and responsibilities. While I would have thought that this message has been communicated over a fair amount of time, I would point you to the Bio-Rad enforcement action, which came out, I believe, last week or perhaps within the last 2 weeks. And in that enforcement action, the Department of Justice and SEC specifically spoke about undefined roles and compliance not having a well-defined role within a company. So it was once again a reminder that you need to have clearly defined roles and clearly defined responsibility. And then finally, the active use of risk management is the key to early detection of possible events and mitigation. This all ties into what the Department of Justice, I think, wants to see regarding a well thought out and detailed plan going forward. What I recommend is that you try to do something which makes the most sense for you. It can be a weighted average. It can be just a straight average of several different factors. In many ways, this is more art than science, and what I hope to be able to do is present several different concepts that you could consider which may be appropriate for your business. One of the more persuasive averages or weights I saw once was from a fellow at, I believe, DHL named James Min. And if you're not with that company, I'm sorry, I misnamed your employer, but he had something called, he had a formula where he looked at the success rate of various logistics sub-suppliers to his company. And if someone had a very high success rate in getting goods and services into countries like 100 or 99%, that for him raised a red flag. Now, it may be counterintuitive to think about or risk rank your logistics suppliers on the number of times they're successful at the first go-around. On the other hand, that may be appropriate for your business model, and it worked for his company because obviously in that business, that was a service they had to deliver, so they had a very good handle on how long it took to get certain goods and products into certain countries. And if you exceed that 100% of the time, that for him raised a red flag. So it's not necessarily a weighted or non-weighted average. It's what makes sense for your business model. So with that, let me turn to third-party due diligence. And here I'm going to step back perhaps a little bit to talk about some of the arguments and theoretical underpinnings. But why is third-party due diligence is important? Well, first of all, 90% of all FCPA cases involve a third party. But more to the point, what do you really know about your business partners, particularly those in the supply chain? And obviously you have less control over third parties than you have your employees. How much is enough? That's always an important question that is asked not only by business leaders, but in fact many of us in the compliance practitioner space. How much is enough? Is it your initial screening? What's the goal you should have? I think the goal is to have a realistic process. And like I said, I'm going to emphasize several times, it is what the Department of Justice wants to see is something that works for you, but it's well thought out. So I put up here just a chart that I'd seen, which is the risk and potentially the burden for managing that risk. But having really, you're only limited by your imagination on what you need to evaluate, and if it's realistic, and if it's well thought out, and if it's in writing, and if it's followed. I think that's something that will be persuasive to the Department of Justice. So the next step, how deep do we dig? And once again, a question that is often asked, you need to establish the level of due diligence that is going to be conducted, and that flows, or from that flows, what level of authorization are you going to need? You're probably going to need some authorization from the third party you're looking at to get some of this information, certainly in certain countries. But I've got a list of another list for you to consider. We have geographic location, we have government involvement, an initial internet search. I've got compensation, scope of goods and services, skills and qualifications, your experience with a third party, and then client recommendation. And by client recommendation, I mean your client, your business unit representative. What is their recommendation, and why have they made that recommendation? One of the things you need to do is have a business justification or other reason to hire this third party from the business perspective. So what's your client recommendation? The experience with a third party. If your company has experience with a third party, that's obviously your best source. But there may be other sources of information as well. And please don't forget a reference. That is something that many in the United States feel is a pro forma, piece of paper that can be filled out or signed by anyone. Nevertheless, the Department of Justice thinks it's important that you have references from the compliance perspective. So I advocate having any third parties list for you 3 references who can talk about their doing business ethically or doing business in compliance or their general way they might do business. And from that, you can simply email them and ask them a list of questions that you develop, their experience with that particular third party, business ethics, etc. The Department of Justice thinks that's important, so that is something that perhaps overlooked a little bit in the United States. Nevertheless, having that sort of written reference questionnaire answered is an important part of your file for each third party. Skills and qualifications. Can the third party really deliver what they say they're going to deliver more, or what they've contracted to deliver? That's an important part of many enforcement actions, and I think that leads to the clear resolution, or at least clear statement from the DOJ that you need to have some statement or attributes which show that this third party has the skills and qualifications to deliver the services they say they're going to your company. The compensation. Is the compensation reasonable? Are they being paid a reasonable amount for the services that they are delivering to your company? Once again, speaking back to the Bio-Rad enforcement action, which recently came out, we had very large compensations paid for relatively low or no levels of service. Now, this was on the sales side. Nevertheless, the same holds true on your supply chain side. Is the compensation you're paying reasonable for the services being delivered? But it also encompasses the broader money or dollar amount that I talked about under the AML analysis, that if you have a high compensated supply chain third party vendor, this is something that is important to your company. And if it's that important to your company, I would suggest to you that on your risk matrix, it should have gone up so that you put more management of that risk around it. Government involvement. Are there government touch points? Geographic location, we visited about that fairly extensively a little bit earlier. But these are some of the due diligence inquiries that you can make. And although I skipped over the initial internet search, that's something that many compliance practitioners often overlook. It's just a Google search. Google the name of the company in and see what comes up. If they're outside the United States, you probably are going to have a local representative do that Google search so they can read it in the local language. But you can pick up a lot of information doing a Google search. So if you have the resources within your compliance function to do an initial Google search, this might be a way for you to identify other media reports about a third party that you were not aware of or were not disclosed in your due diligence questionnaire, if that's something that you use going forward. Okay, step 3. What do we need to know? And here I've got a list of things that you need to know. So how have you collected the data? What's the data collection? Verification and validation, and then evaluation of early warning signs. The verification and validation, if you have a questionnaire, what you're doing in this step is you're validating the information you've been given. And if you are now in China or some other country where it is harder to do due diligence, you may have less ability to validate the information you have obtained directly from the third-party supplier or third-party vendor. So you may have to put other risk management techniques around it. But here are some of the things that you need to know. We've talked about a few of those, and some others you're probably aware of from other third-party checklists or questionnaires you may have seen, or third-party protocols. Obviously, they're business qualifications. I spoke at length, or on the last slide, about reference checks, licenses and registration, sanctioned parties, connections, politically exposed persons. This could be a direct PEP. It could be a family member, or sometimes even a close ally of a PEP. So don't forget the connections part of the politically exposed persons. The identification and selection, here this speaks to how did you find out about this third party. If you were directed to them by a government employee or some other third party, that's something that you need to consider. We've talked at length about compensation, both the amount of compensation and the percentage profit that it may appear they're receiving. That's something that the Department of Justice is certainly taking a closer look at as well. And then litigation and criminal investigations. Here I need to emphasize this certainly is something that you need to consider, but you also should take a look at the substance of these. So once upon a time I was looking at a freight forward in a country for a particular client, and this freight forward had, I think it was well over 30 pages of litigation. And so I was contracted to do a deep dive on this, and so I did, and I looked at the actual lawsuits. Well, as a freight forwarder, there were many damaged cargo claims, and it turned out that 99% of the litigation was simply that, which was damaged cargo. And so I was able to write that off from a compliance perspective. It may have had other considerations the company need to put into play, or at least take a look at, but from the compliance perspective, simply because there's a large number of lawsuits does not disqualify you. The same is true of some particularly litigious countries such as Russia. Simply because a company has had a large number of lawsuits, they may have been on the outs with the government, they may be in competition with some particularly litigious people. There can be a wide variety of reasons. It doesn't disqualify that company from doing business with you, but you need to take a perhaps deeper dive. Certainly on criminal, if something pops up in terms of a criminal investigation, you've got to ask questions. It may be as simple as a false positive, a same or similar name. But if there are criminal allegations, those need to be evaluated going forward, and that's something you really do need to know. Now it comes down to the approval part. One of the question you asked a little bit earlier, Karen, was on weighting of factors. And what I really want to emphasize yet again is put something in place that works for you, but be consistent with that. Do not make an exception on a regular basis. If you do, it doesn't mean you can't make an exception, but what it does mean, if you do make an exception, that exception needs to be documented. These professional supply chain people you will talk to, those who have actually master's degrees in supply chain and do this for a living, will tell you companies get in trouble when the exception comes in. So put a protocol in and try to follow that protocol. If you do have to go outside that protocol, document why you have done so. So here I've got the approval, which under this protocol depended on the level of risk and the documentation, and certainly a judgment call by someone in the compliance function. You may seek guidance from someone in your supply chain function. You may want to make a joint decision, but whatever decision is made needs to be documented. There needs to be a written reason or disposition of this. This does not need to be a novel. It doesn't need to be a white paper. It can be as short as 3 or 4 sentence paragraph, but you have to be able to document to a regulator that you have reviewed the items in the file, you have evaluated the levels of risk, and that is done by writing down that something like this risk level was seen, it has been reviewed, these red flags appeared and were cleared, and here's evidence of their being cleared. I make this decision based upon the following documents. Whatever it is, you need to be able to document the decision that you have made. And then post-approval. What are your contract terms? What rights and obligations do you have? An annual certification, training, and then updated due diligence. I'm going to go into each of these a little bit more detail. So under this particular protocol, the post-approval is part of step 5. So make your decision, have a protocol in place and follow it, and then engage in your post-contract signing management. Now I'd like to turn to Tyco. And this is not to pick on Tyco, if anybody on here is from Tyco who's happened to be listening to this, but it's because Tyco has gone through a couple of FCPA enforcement actions, but more importantly, Tyco has publicized what they did regarding their third-party program to really dig themselves out of FCPA morass. Tyco grew in the late 90s and early aughts through acquisitions. So they had a large number of inorganic companies being put together, a large number of third parties in each of these acquisitions, and Tyco really did not have a good handle on who they were doing business with or really much of anything else. And so as part of their FCPA settlement, or remediation I should say, they put a very robust third-party management program in place. And they publicized this. They wrote about this. They've written in a couple of magazines. I mentioned Scott Moritz a little bit earlier. Scott was actually as part of their external consultant team, and Scott wrote an article, I think in SCCE, but it may have been Compliance Week. Nevertheless, they were well publicized this, and this has been great information from the compliance practitioner. So to start with, they had 66,000 third parties identified at the start of the project. Of those, turned out 18,000 were mainly customers. And then they were able to get another 16,000 down due to excessive risk of low usage. Basically, they didn't use them. That left 32,000 to be examined. And of those 32,000, it turned out that only 1,750 were identified at high risk. And I use this chart a lot, and I use these numbers a lot, and I talk to people about this is the kind of way you can cut down to the truly high risk of your company. They went from 66,000 to 1,750. Now I recognize it's still going to be a lot of work at 1,750, but this is the kind of risk-based analysis and risk-based protocol and procedure that the Department of Justice wants to see. I would also reemphasize that this was done under the auspices of being in an FCPA investigation and a FCPA enforcement action, so that I think we can all have some comfort that this is something that the department has at least considered and tacitly passed on. So this shows you how you can cut down the number of third parties by a risk-based approach, whatever that may mean for your company. Sure, and it bears repeating because it really is significant. The Tyco program was created and utilized during an FCPA investigation and an FCPA enforcement action when the company was under a deferred prosecution agreement and a monitor. So we know we have had the DOJ taking a look at this probably very closely. More importantly, and really for our benefit, ours being the compliance field, they publicized it. And this has been well talked about, well documented, well written about, well talked about on the speaker circuit. If you've ever heard Scott Moritz speak, he's a great speaker, and he talks about this at length and with a great amount of detail. So it's information that is in the public arena that we all can use, that we can have comfort that a company who went through this process of an FCPA enforcement action had to deal with. So now what I'd like to do is, if I could, go through the 7 steps to third-party qualification that Tyco used. And once again, this is specific to Tyco, but it does give you some ideas, some of the concepts you've heard in some of the other methods I talked about. But once again, we've had the DOJ taking a look at this, or at least doing this under the auspices of being in an enforcement action. So number 1, it all starts with a business sponsor. Identify who that primary contact would be within your company, and that will be the third party's primary contact, point of contact in your company as well. So you have a business sponsor who provides number 2, which is a business justification. But equally importantly, going forward, they're going to be the point of contact. And so you, as the compliance practitioner, can send compliance information, compliance questionnaires, requests for updated due diligence. You can put a lot of management around that business sponsor. So it's an important cog, an important part of certainly Tyco's process. Number 2, business sponsor. And this is where I think Tyco really helped crystallize this thinking. You have to have a sponsor who should articulate a commercial reason as to why a third party should continue to work with your company. If there's no business reason to continue working with this third party, they don't need to be a part of your organization, taking up time and space, both in terms of something as simple as being on your SAP system or any other system, ERP system you might use, to having to consider dealing with them. So a business justification is an important step. And once again, this is something your business sponsor should do, not your compliance function. Step 3, a third-party questionnaire. I think everyone understands this from the third-party sales channel perspective, but it is equally valid and equally important in the third-party supply chain. You can change your questionnaire, you can cut your questionnaire down, but you need to ask some basic questions along the lines of the following. Who are the owners? Who are the ultimate beneficial owners if they're different? Have they gone through any sort of compliance or anti-corruption international or domestic investigation? Are they generally aware? And are there any government officials who are either owners or family members that are government officials? I recognize that this is a questionnaire and information can be false or manipulated. Nevertheless, it's an important step that you need to have in place because it then leads to how you validate that information. In the Tyco process, the next step 4, was the FCPA certification. And here a representative from the third party was required to sign a statement that it will comply with the FCPA and will not pay any bribes directly or indirectly. Once again, I recognize that a certification is simply a certification. It's simply, many people would say, it's just a piece of paper that's being signed. But this is something that the Department of Justice has said is important, and so it's something that I think you need to consider as part of your program going forward. Next up, step 5, the risk assessment due diligence. And I should say in the Tyco program, the FCPA certification was actually a part of the due diligence questionnaire. So most companies, I think, don't require that until after or at contract signing, but Tyco took it a step back and perhaps a step further. They required it at the time of the completion of the questionnaire. So a risk assessment due diligence. All information on the third party needs to be analyzed and assigned a risk score to determine the level of due diligence. Factors included the relationship to the company, and this is the Tyco program, the volume of business the company did with Tyco, the geographic regions where the third party did business, and foreign government touchpoints. In the Tyco system, I don't believe it was weighted. They were all given equal value. And then just a raw score, they moved to, from there, almost a bell-shaped curve or just a straight, perhaps even a straight line where they just took from high to low. So there's different ways you can do this. I tend not to do weighting, but some companies such as General Electric have a weighted score that they've been able to develop with their own experience and experience modifiers. So once again, it's whatever works for you and works within the context of your business. And if you've been doing compliance and your compliance program is more mature, it may be that you can put weights onto your score that you found appropriate. But the key is document that weight, those weights you put in, and be able to justify those, preferably in writing. Next, step 6 was a written agreement. The Department of Justice clearly has suggested that FCPA compliance terms and conditions be in any commercial contract, and an agreement from the third party that would not pay bribes, but this was also a part of the TICO program going forward. And step 7, which is training. And step 7, that slide will pop up here in a minute. There we go. You need to provide training to third parties. I was asked earlier this morning about what level of training. How do you determine what level of training? Well, training can be through various media, but what the key here is with everything else that we're talking about, it's risk ranking. If you have a high-risk third party in the supply chain, they may need live training, and may need someone from your compliance function. They may need to train them if they have lots of government touch points. If you have a logistics service provider, someone like that. There can be other forms of media. It can be online, it can be web-based, it can be a CD-based. At one point, HP required over 155,000 I believe called ops partners, but whatever their chain was, global ops partners, to take a 1-hour CD compliance training. So there are different media that you can use, but the key, I think, is to risk-based, who's going to get the training, and the true high risk in your third-party supply chain need to have live training or appropriate high-risk training.